set in us all of your blessed commandments, so that trampling all carnal desires, we may begin to live according to the Spirit, both willing and doing everything for your good pleasure. For you are the light of our souls and bodies, Christ God, and we render glory to you, and to your eternal Father, and to your all-holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, now and always and forever and ever. And so we continue this evening with this conference, the second half of our discussion of agape, New Testament love. In the prior conference, we of course raised the issue of the difference between eros and agape. We also said that agape represents the willingness to serve without the desire for reciprocation, and the willingness to suffer without the desire for retaliation. At the last conference, we covered in detail the willingness to suffer without the desire for retaliation. And so in this conference, we will cover the second half of that dimension of agape, which is found in the gospel. The willingness to serve without the desire for reciprocation. The first thing to know about the definition, in fact in both sides, both dimensions of agape, is willingness. Willingness. As we said earlier, it is a matter of will. It is a matter of choosing to do something. It's a matter of using the faculty that's given by God of freedom to choose to do this rather than that. The second thing to notice is the willing to serve without the desire for reciprocation. Now, many people serve and are not reciprocated, but they desire to be reciprocated. They desire to get something back. Huh? Now, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the willingness to serve just because the need is there. Earlier in this conference, I mentioned the famous story in the middle of Brother Karamazov by Dostoevsky, the story of the Lady of Little Faith, who thought she was dying. Remember? Part of that story is, that we did not mention at the time, that this lady had a daughter, and that she went to this priest, Zosima, who was the holiest man in Russia, when she thought everything was well, and she went to him and she told him that she wanted to become a missionary in India. And he asked her why. And she said, because there's all the suffering and the pain and so forth in India. And he said to her, but don't you have a daughter at home who's an invalid? And she said, yes, but I've got money. And I can have her taken care of, and then I can go to India and take care of people, and more people will be helped. And so the conversation went on between Zosima and this lady, and finally it comes out what the problem is. The problem is that this woman has used up all of her youth taking care of this invalid girl, and the girl has never once said thank you. You see, the reciprocation she was looking for was not money, but it was thanks. Reciprocation, and without that reciprocation, she just didn't want to go on. But the starets, Father Zosima, the holy monk, says to her, but don't you see, that if you make reciprocation, gratitude in this case, if you make gratitude the condition for giving your love, if you make gratitude for the condition, for a condition for you caring, then those people that don't have the ability to show gratitude will be left uncared for. Why people can't show gratitude, we don't know. But that this is the case is for certain, huh? And yet those are people who are loved by God as much as anyone else, and they need help because they're in pain. But if we put the condition that someone has to thank us, then those are the people that don't get served. And so it is with every other condition of reciprocation. Once we place a condition on our service, then we are doing the service in order to get that reciprocation. We are not doing it just because the person is in need. Agape is the willingness to serve. The willingness to serve without the desire for reciprocation. The willingness to serve just because the need is there. And again, from the teaching and from the example of Jesus, say in Gethsemane when he heals the armed servant of the high priest, that includes service to the enemy. Just because a need is there. In the Constitution of the United States, the American Constitution, which is more or less the same as most constitutions of Western democracies, there is mentioned only one crime in the entire Constitution. That is, the Constitution is the fundamental document. It's not the one, all the laws. Only one crime is mentioned in the fundamental document of the United States, the Constitution of the United States, and a similar reality exists in most constitutions. The one crime is treason. And it says in the Constitution that anyone who gives aid and comfort to the enemy is guilty of treason. But that's just the opposite of what Jesus says, isn't it? He says we are supposed to give aid and comfort even if a person is an enemy. Why? Because the enemy of the state is not the enemy of God. For the Christian, the enemy of the state is a child of God to be loved as Christ God loved him or her. And our approach, regardless of where people live on the earth, regardless of whether a state defines them as an enemy or not, our approach to them is with the question, what would Jesus do here? Our approach is to be Christ-like. So you have on the one hand a document, the fundamental document of a society and of most societies, saying that if you give aid and comfort to an enemy, it's treason, it's a capital offense, you can be killed for it. And on the other hand, you have the gospel saying, love your enemies, do good to those who persecute you, pray for those, etc., etc. Huh? And so, all that I'm saying here is this. Agape, unconditional care or love. Agape means that you are a person of compassion. That's what you choose to be. Compassion is a breakdown of the words common passion. When someone is suffering, and you have a common passion with them, then their suffering enters you, and you go forward and help them just because they're suffering. Just because they're suffering. Just because they have the need, that's all. Not because they're black, white, men, women, Jews, Christians, Hindus, makes no difference. The only issue is they're suffering. And we are supposed to be agents of the God of mercy, and therefore we bring mercy. We serve just because mercy is needed, that's all. It may be something as simple as a cup of tea. It may be a smile. It may be a kind word. It may just be anticipating something that someone needs. Or it may be things far greater than this, far larger than this. But the point is, we don't serve because of what we're going to get out of it. We serve only because the person has a need, and this is what we have committed our life to in Christ, to being incarnations and fleshments of mercy as he was. So, let us go back to agape, the willingness to serve without the desire for reciprocation. I say this theme is summed up in the New Testament under the theme of the suffering servant. As we mentioned earlier, the suffering servant is that mysterious character out of Isaiah who suffers innocently, suffers terribly, but suffers in a way that somehow the sufferings of others are relieved. That's the suffering servant. We said earlier that when Jesus is baptized, the words that he hears out of heaven, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased," they're the opening lines of the hymn of the suffering servant. The suffering servant is the one who suffers and gets absolutely nothing back. In fact, gets negative back. But there is a need there. In fact, in order for the suffering servant to serve, he has to suffer. He has to suffer. Many years ago in the United States, a man tried to do some work, give some help, in terms of a terrible problem that exists there, which is the migrant farm workers. Disgraceful problem. Human beings, mostly Mexican, are brought over the border, and they and their families are forced to live in moving shacks with no water, no electricity, none of the amenities of life, and filth, dirt situations, in order to do the harvesting and the planting and so forth and so on for these massive plantation owners in California. Plantation owners make literally tens upon tens of millions of dollars off this slave labor. They're paid dirt wages. Their children are without medical care, hardly any education, and of course they're the bottom of the barrel and everything. Well, a Mexican-American man, Catholic man by the name of Cesar Chavez, about 30 years ago, tried to work with these people and tried to organize them and so forth so that they could have a better living in the context of doing what they were doing. And someone once asked him, "Why are you doing this?" And his answer was, "To be a man is to be willing to suffer for others. To be a man is to be willing to suffer for others. To be a person is to be willing to suffer for others. Suffer in order to serve, not because suffering in and of itself has any value. It does not. As I quoted the biblical scholar John L. Mackenzie, he says, "Mere animal pain does not save. Identification with Jesus' suffering is identification with Jesus' loving. In the real world of evil, in order to love, you have to suffer. Because evil will not let love exist. It will try to stop it, it will try to destroy it. So in order to serve real human beings, in the real atmosphere in which we live, which is an atmosphere that's heavy with evil around us, sometimes it's necessary to suffer, sometimes a lot. To be a man, says Cesar Chavez, is to be willing to suffer for others. There is only one sentence in the New Testament, one sentence in the New Testament, in which Jesus sums up his ministry in just one sentence. And that one sentence occurs when the sons of Zebedee, in one gospel and their mother in the other, asked Jesus for the place next to him in his reign. See, they think he's going to be a political Messiah. They think he's going to save Israel by military might, and he's going to be the new king of Israel, and he's going to have he's just going to have a lot of stuff to hand out to his friends. Money, positions, prestige, and power. And so they asked for the two places next to him. And Jesus says he can't give them those, you know. And then he says, can they drink of the cup and be baptized in the baptism that he is going to be baptized? They say yes. But the sentence is this, that sums up Jesus' whole ministry according to biblical scholars. Just so the Son of Man came, not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus came to serve. And therefore, if we are disciples of Jesus, that's what we're here to do also. If Christ is in us and we are in Christ, and our mission is the same mission as Christ, then our way has to be the same way, which is not that we come to be served, but we come to serve. We use life's energy up to serve, regardless of who the person is, regardless of what the situation is. But this is real love. And here's the point that's so important. Remember, we read extensively several conferences ago from John Paul II's encyclical Divisa Misericordia. And in that, you see, we read several times a particular little paragraph. I made a point of reading it several times so you would remember it at this point. And that paragraph was something approximately like this. It said that mercy, giving mercy, was not a mere obligation that Jesus was teaching, but was essential for communicating, for revealing, it was John Paul II's word, for revealing the Father in his mercy to humanity. Remember that? Living a life of mercy, he said, and following Jesus was an essential step in revealing the Father's mercy to the world. And so we serve, even at the point of suffering. Not just because there's a person in need, but also because the world is in desperate need of seeing active mercy, and because there is something mysterious about the fact when we mercifully act towards people, something of God is revealed because we are participating in the reality of God. This is what the suffering servant is. The one who suffers in order to serve, and people are saved through that action. Now I know at this moment, this sounds a little complicated. This sounds a little obtuse. This sounds almost like it's not real. But I assure you it is. When the Pope says that active mercy done by you and I reveals the Father of mercy to others, he knows what he's talking about. It does. And it does so all the more at the point when we are merciful or we serve where no one expects service, where we're dealing, for example, with the enemy, or under terrible crisis situations where justice could never demand that we serve. The more difficult the situation that we bring mercy to, the more the Father is revealed. The best, the very best example I know of an explanation, a description, a presentation of the theme of the suffering servant outside of the New Testament is found in a novel entitled The Last of the Just. The Last of the Just, by a man by the name of Andrei Schwartzbart. Schwartzbart is spelled S-C-H-W-A-R-T-Z-B-A-R-T. Andrei Schwartzbart was a survivor of the concentration camps, 4 years. This novel is one of the most powerful pieces ever to come out of that experience. The title Last of the Just comes from the fact that there is a Jewish spiritual tradition that says, based on the Isaiah suffering servant, there is a Jewish spiritual tradition that says, at every moment there lives in the world 36 suffering servants. 36. People who suffer innocently. And through their innocent suffering, by the mysterious work of God, they manage to serve and bring mercy to the world just enough so that the world will not collapse under its own evil, so the world will continue to exist until the Messiah comes. So there exist 36 suffering servants at all times, and these suffering servants are called in Jewish spiritual tradition just men. Just does not mean justice, it means righteous. 36 righteous men, 36 suffering servants are the pillars on which the world stands until the Messiah comes. And they are the pillars because they absorb the evil of the world and somehow serve through mercy while absorbing that evil. The story of The Last of the Just is about a man by the name of Ernie Levy. He's a cosmopolitan Jew in Germany in the 1930s. He's got his business, he's doing quite well. He's about to get married to Golda. There's stuff going on with the Nazis and with Hitler and National Socialism and that business there, but their feeling on it is it's nothing, it's going to pass. Politics goes up and goes down, we just go on, don't worry about it. Well, it doesn't work out that way. Things keep getting worse and worse. Ernie Levy's mother and father are told by some old rabbis, a couple of old rabbis at different times, that Ernie Levy is one of the 36 just men. And Ernie Levy passes it off. He says, that's superstition. That's not real. I got to worry about my business. I got to worry about my wedding. Well, things get worse and worse under the Nazis. And one night, as happened over and over and over again, truckloads of German military came in, truckloads of Nazis, Gestapo, whatever it was at the time that was being ordered around, and they were doing their jobs obediently, and rounded up the whole city, put them in the trucks, brought the trucks to the railroad station, and then loaded the people on those little boxcars. Boxcars containing 80 or 100 people. All they could do would be stand, couldn't sit, no toilet facilities, heat, cold, made no difference, and loaded them on. They take Ernie. Ernie and Golda are separated. All Ernie's wealth is gone. And they take Ernie to one of the concentration camps. And Ernie, over the next several years in the concentration camp, manages to stay alive by all kinds of little efforts, tricks. But he sees all kinds of things. He sees, for example, his own people being raped and murdered, beaten by, he sees all. And everything he sees destroys his faith in God. Everything he sees absolutely destroys his belief in God. As he sees men and women and children beaten and slaughtered and tortured and tormented. And his life deteriorates, his internal, emotional life, psychological life, mental life. It just collapses and he becomes a nihilist, meaning he believes there is nothing in the universe that's worthwhile, and all he wants to do is die like a bug. But he doesn't have the courage even to kill himself. And so, for example, he's at the grave and they're machine gunning his fellow Jews, and his job, along with a few others, is as they machine gun 20, he would throw the dirt on top of them, and then machine gun 20 more and he'd throw the dirt on top of them. And this was his world for several weeks. After several years of this, he became too sick to work himself. And so, when you became too sick to work in a concentration camp, then you went to the extermination camp. And so he was put on the boxcar to be shipped to the extermination camp. He's sick, he's feverish, he's nauseous, and there's no meaning in life. He just wants to die. And in the boxcar, with these 80 or 100 other sick people, some already dead, everyone feverish, no place to sit, no toilet facilities, all of a sudden, he looks down and he sees lying on the floor Golda, who he was going to marry. And she's absolutely torn apart. She's just a wretch of a person at this point, mentally and physically destroyed. Crazy. You see, he and Golda could have gotten out. So on top of all the other misery he has, there is that strange misery of, it might have been. It could have been different. And he's just crushed by it, because it didn't have to be this way. He had his chance to get out. And so they move him into Auschwitz on the train. Those that could work more, a little more, were put to the right. Those that couldn't do anything were moved to the left. He's sent to the left. He can do nothing. He's too sick. He's too emaciated. He doesn't care. He just wants to die. He knows what's going to happen. All the people around him are talking as if they're going to a shower, and finally they're going to be clean, and finally they're going to get rid of the lice and the dirt, and finally they're going to get some food. And of course, that was the propaganda the Germans gave them to keep them in order till they were actually gassed. Ernie doesn't believe it at all. He knows exactly what's going to happen to him. He doesn't care. He just wants to die. And so they're all brought into a place, and as the Germans did, all their hair was shaved, because the Germans saved the hair of all the people that they exterminated in order to make carpets and so forth out of it. Half the people he's standing with, half of the 100 or so people he's standing with, more than half are little children, because children are as unproductive as sick people, little children, 4, 5, 6, 8. They can't work, so they're exterminated. So they're all standing there naked and all talking that they're going into a shower. And so they're all pushed into this little room, a tiny room, And they see the shower nozzles up above. And they're all talking about finally they're going to be cleaned and so forth and so on. And they're all pushed into this concrete room. And then, remember, Schwarzbart was there. He knew. He was there for 4 years. And then the iron door of the shower room is slammed shut against the concrete. And with the bang of the iron on the concrete, the illusion is broken. They know what's going to happen. Because with the bang and the clang comes total darkness. And all of a sudden, people go mad, screaming and yelling, trying to get out, banging at the door in the total darkness. The gas is turned on. It is absolute madness. If you've ever been to Auschwitz, you see these rooms, these shower rooms where they exterminated people, and they're concrete, but on the ceilings, people have actually with their fingers peeled off the concrete trying to get out. It's absolute terror. Small space, dark, in a world you don't know, naked, in a hostile world. And they're screeching and yelling. And all of a sudden, again, remember, Schwarzbart went through this for 4 years. He saw stuff like this. All of a sudden, one of the children, and the children are out of their mind in terror. If you can imagine what a little 4 or 5 or 6-year-old in a black world with adults going crazy, they are out of their mind with terror. And one of the children, to try to relieve himself of terror, begins to yell out, "Daddy, Daddy, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. Please forgive me. I promise I'll be a good boy. I'll never do it again." He thinks he is being punished for something he did in the past by his father. And he's pleading with the father to help him, let him out, and he'll be a good boy. And remember, Schwarzbart was there. And then a second child hears it. And a second child gets it in his mind that that's what's really going on here. He's being punished by his father. And so he starts screeching, "Father, Father, I'm sorry. I'll be a good boy. I promise I'll be a good boy. I'll never take the bicycle again," etc., etc. And then a third, and then a fourth. The gas is on. They are all screeching for their father to forgive them and to have mercy on them, to help them and take them out of here. They're absolutely terrorized out of their minds. Ernie Levy hears it. It just drives him into the ground. It makes life all the worse from what it was before. He just wants to die. The gas is on. There's only 2 minutes, 3 minutes to live anyway. But he listens. He listens. They're all Jewish. And he says, "Children, children, children, listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. Stop yelling. Don't worry about it. We're all going to the Messianic banquet." He doesn't believe a word of it. He thinks he's going to be annihilated. But see, the children are Jewish. The minute they hear the word Messianic banquet, they know the Messianic banquet because that's the Sabbath. That's what they, not the Sabbath, the Passover. That's the meal, you know. He says, "We're all going to the Messianic banquet," and he starts describing the things that are used for the Passover meal. The tablecloth, the food, the herbs, and that they all know. He says, now it's out there and the table's out and it has this on it and that on it. And they begin to listen a little bit. Don't worry, it's only going to be 3 minutes before we get there." And he starts describing the Messianic meal. And one of the children yells out, "Is Aunt Sophie there?" And he says, "Sophie's there, Sophie's there, she's doing this." He describes something that's done in preparation for the Passover meal. And another child yells out, "Is my daddy there?" And he says, "Yes, he's putting his clothes on this way and that way," which the child would know, huh? And all the time he's telling them to take a deep, deep breath, and they'll get there faster. Because if you breathe the Zyklon B gas in quickly, you just expire. But if you don't, if you struggle against it, you strangle to death. And he can't breathe it in deeply because he's talking and talking hard. And so finally they quiet down. He keeps telling them the story, which reminds him of his youth, which is all gone and will never be again, and everything that's lost. And he continues to describe the Messianic banquet. And they die, and he strangles. But they die in peace. And here's the point. If Ernie Levy did not accept the task of serving those children under those horrible conditions, of listening to their pain and doing something in response to it, then when they called out to the Father for mercy, there would have been no one there to give it. But because he was faithful, because he did not close his mind down to the suffering of others, even though the situation was terrible for him and horrible, those children, when they cried out, "Father, Father, help me, have mercy on me, I'm sorry," their real father, their Father in heaven, answered with Ernie Levy, who brought them peace instead of terror in the last 2 minutes of their life. But in order for him to do that, he himself had to suffer. Not just the mere strangulation, which was terrible, but he had to suffer all the pain that it meant to let that suffering of the children end, as well as the pain of the lost past. You see, the key to suffering, that the key to serving suffering humanity as Jesus served them is, you have to be willing to let the pain of others into your existence. For if you do not let the pain in, you will never have the urgency nor the creativity to respond. Never. Impossible. But if you let the pain of suffering people into your presence, at least you have a chance of having urgency and creativity to do something as Ernie did. Never, never, never in justice, never in justice could anyone demand under those circumstances that Ernie Levy let the pain of those children in. He was in the middle of his own misery. He was in the last minutes of his own life. He was sick. He was feverish. Justice could not possibly demand that Ernie Levy do anything. But compassion did. He had a common passion because a human being, children, were screeching and yelling in terror. And therefore, he did not cut their pain out as he could have. He let it in, and in some mysterious way, the idea hit him how to calm them. They only had a minute or 2 minutes left to life. But that wasn't the issue. The issue was they were living in terror. In Matthew 25, the famous Last Judgment passage, you remember how it goes. I was hungry, you gave me to eat, thirsty, you gave me to drink, and they all say, Lord, where did we see you? Where did we see you? The point is, it takes perceptual courage to serve. You've got to be willing to have the courage to see the hurt person in front of you. And the more you see the hurt person in front of you, the less you will attack, and the more you will look for a way to serve. But if you don't see the pain and the wounds of others, then attack becomes easy. It becomes simple. And so it could have been very, very easy for Ernie Levy in that gas chamber to add to the problem. In his own misery and confusion and anxiety and torment, he hears the children yelling. He could have said, pushed them away and said, shut up, be quiet. But that's not the way it came to him. It came to him as pain. The problem with letting pain of others in is the minute we let the pain of others into our lives, the minute we leave the suffering of others into our lives, we suffer. It's far easier to worry about the baseball game and the soccer match and the politics and the fashion and the entertainment on the television or the news or whatever it is. But if we were to stop and think of the loneliness, for example, the agony in some instances, the fear and the hopelessness of, say, elderly people in a rest home, the minute we allow it into our presence, it almost forces us, because we're human beings, to start thinking about how to respond. The same is true any place, anywhere, with any human being. I guarantee that if we do not allow the pain of others into our presence, if we refuse to see the wounds of others, there will be no response. None whatsoever. It's a guaranteed way not to serve. But that's not what Jesus did, huh? That's not what the suffering servant is about. We said the task of the Christian is to be an artist of agape, an artist of love. It's not meeting a legal requirement. It's revealing the Father's mercy, and that's precisely what Ernie Levy did in that gas chamber. That's precisely what Schwarzbach does through the novel. That's precisely what Jesus does in the gospel. For those children receive mercy, but they received it at the cost of suffering by someone else. But without that price, in this real world of evil, they would have been left to die in utter terror instead of in peace. And so I submit to you that when in Divisa Misericordia, John Paul II says that being merciful, that Christ demanded that his followers be merciful. Be merciful as your heavenly Father is merciful. I want mercy and not sacrifice. That when he says that's not an obligation in the sense of a normal obligation, that's a condition for revealing the Father's mercy. I submit to you that's true. And we never know when we're doing it. Take, for example, the little example that we're using here. The lonely, suffering, isolated person whose life is gone and who's lying in a rest home. Who knows what one act of going there, trying to talk, just holding her hand or holding his hand, just trying to do mercy, who knows what that's going to reveal to the person? Because mercy is the life of God. What is absolutely for certain is if I don't go there, they will remain isolated, lonely, dejected, depressed, or whatever it is in a merciless world. For me to get there, though, the first step has to be the willingness to let their suffering into my presence. Because without that, nothing happens. There's no desire to get up and to leave the soccer match and go down there. And so agape, the New Testament word for love, Unconditional love and care. Ernie Levy could have made it a condition that people have at least some life to live more than 2 minutes before I help them. What difference does 2 minutes make? The condition there would have been that they had a long life to live. There was no condition on time. It was just the need was there at the moment. How many people do we not help because we ever so subtly make conditions and we don't even realize it? Oh, they're not worth it, or it's only a small thing, or it's this, or, you know. Agape, unconditional love. No reciprocation desire like an eros. If it comes, it comes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But that's not the issue. It's just the need is there. Agape. Agape is the way to peace. There is, as we said earlier, when we were talking about the willingness to suffer without the desire for retaliation, victory never leads to peace. It just leads to more hurt, more retaliation. An eye for an eye always leads to a tooth for a tooth and on out. Victory never leads to peace. It just leads to humiliation and the desire to get the foot off your neck so you can get back. The only thing that leads to peace is reconciliation. And reconciliation comes first in terms of forgiving those who have damaged us or hurt us, more than forgiving, doing them good. That's the road to union back. And secondly, reconciliation comes by just serving people in need. How can there be any peace if you're walking by people who are suffering, crying out for help, maybe in silence, and you just walk by? Where's the peace? That's the peace of a Disneyland surrounded by a global ghetto. Misery on all sides, but a little personal Disneyland, a little personal Isle of Tranquility. That's not the peace of the gospel, the peace of Christ. And so it's reconciliation. Agape is the road to reconciliation, and reconciliation is the only road to peace. And so we conclude this presentation on New Testament love by saying once again, all that we're talking about is just what we said when we started it. The recognition with St. Paul of the truth of what John of the Cross said. The smallest deed of Christ-like love is more precious to God and more profitable to the soul and to the church and to the world than all other things put together. There is a real choice about what to do with life, moment to moment. This is a real choice. For those who say, the Lamb of God, that's a wimpy way to live. You'll just be a doormat. You're just trying to find the easy way out. You just don't want to be bothered with the hard stuff of the world, following the nonviolent Jesus and his way of mercy. I say to you, I say to them, just try to commit one day to doing it the way Jesus says doing it, and you'll find fire. Fire. A death to self that you have never known before. But a good fire. A fire of God, a fire that cleanses. And so, we are confronted with a simple fact. Jesus says, Love one another as I have loved you, to his disciples. We know how he loves. He loves agapeistically. He loves enemies. He loves friends. He allows the suffering into his presence in order to respond to it, just like he did in Gethsemane with the armed servant of the high priest. We know how Jesus loves, and the more we ponder the gospel, the more we'll know. The only issue is, are we going to commit ourselves each morning to a day in, day out, moment to moment, where love is agapeistic love, Christ-like love, is to be our God? Or are we going to commit ourselves moment to moment to something else being our God? Jesus comes and tells us, God is Father, God is love. If that's the case, a commitment to Christ-like love in the moment is a commitment to God. A commitment to anything else moment to moment is a commitment to an idol. How much of the violence, destruction, enmity, and so forth that we find that Christians have done over the centuries has been done 100% because the commitment was something other than simply loving as Christ loved, moment to moment. I submit to you, you were given your gift of faith, your baptism, for no other reason than to love as Christ loved in this moment right now and in the next, and to get up every morning with that commitment. But you were given that because you have a part to play, a part every bit as serious as the part Ernie Levy had to play in the gas chamber. Each of us will not know it till eternity. But in eternity we will know who we were supposed to reveal the Father of mercy to, who we revealed it to, and who we didn't, because we refused to be merciful in that moment. We are co-redeemers with Christ, the God of love and mercy incarnate. Our task is clear.